Scary stories that happen during the night shifts. There is a long driveway near our studio, and at the end there is a shed. The guy stood absolutely still about halfway across the yard. He didn't move an inch, as if frozen in time. There were no lights on, but the moonlight was just right and I could see him clearly. At first we were too shocked to react, but when the initial fear passed, we couldn't stop laughing. It turned out that he was just an old man who had escaped from a nearby nursing home. He looked like he was caught in the rain, probably trying to find shelter under some leaky roof. I gave him dry clothes and called the police to return him to where he belonged. Strangely enough, this was not the last time he appeared like this. He repeated the same trick a few more times, as if it was his way of getting out. I was robbed at gunpoint when I was closing Wendy's at 1 a.m. A guy with a gun demanded that I open the safe. Of course, we didn't have the combination. Luckily, I convinced him that we couldn't open it, and he ran away with nothing. He was hiding in a garbage container, waiting for someone to take out the trash. And my idiot colleague went in, ignoring the sign warning him not to do so. The worst part is that I recognized the attacker. He worked in our store less than a year ago. He seemed like a cool guy back then. I desperately hope he didn't remember my face. I worked in a coffee shop that was open late at the time. I was on shift with another colleague. One of our patrons, a homeless man, came in obviously intoxicated and sat down at one of the tables in the back of the lobby. He didn't make a scene, so we just let him sit there for a while. It was raining outside, and we didn't want him to get sick. An hour passed, and it was about half an hour before closing time. So a colleague went over to the man to wake him up. A moment later, he comes to me and says that we have a problem. Apparently, the drunken homeless man does not wake up. He doesn't move at all. I did the only thing I could do in this situation. I called the police. They told me that it was not an ordinary case for him and that he was their regular customer. They finally managed to get him up and out of the store before we closed. I know, not particularly scary, but for a while we really thought the dude was dead. I used to be the only one in the IT company's night support team. I used to come in when the last people were leaving the office and stay there all night by myself. About a month later, I started hearing noises in the office. Floor creaks, strange voices, or guttural sounds, as if someone was choking. At first, I didn't pay attention. The office was old, and old buildings often make strange noises. But then I noticed that when I went out to eat or went to the bathroom and then came back, there were lights on that I didn't turn on, or cabinets open that I didn't touch. I was 100% sure that some homicidal maniac was just hiding under the table and waiting for the right moment to finish me off. It turned out that one of our managers was in the process of moving. Due to a scheduling glitch, he had no place to live, so he moved into his office with the door closed. The squeaking was him trying to sneak into his office without telling me, and the sounds I heard were snoring. He was embarrassed by this situation, so he waited until I left my workstation to run out and get a drink or snacks from the cabinet. I was working in a factory when I saw a fox slip between the legs of a colleague who was napping in a chair at the time. We have a big problem with rats, so at first I thought it was a fucking huge rat. I was doing maintenance on a hospital that was about to close. I received so many calls from their phone operator that I was scared shitless. He was calling because the intensive care unit was sounding a blue signal for some reason. Cardiac arrest? The only service still available at the time was an ambulance. Critical patients were stabilized and transferred to another hospital. There were no hospitalized patients. So I replied with the standard answer, "I'll look into it, of course, but this system doesn't work." But it was not a malfunction. Some guy managed to get into the building even though everything but the emergency room entrance was closed, and he had a heart attack. I don't know what he was doing there, although I suspect he broke into steel copper. Say what you will, but he was in the perfect place to have a heart attack. They helped me take him to the emergency room, and that was the first and last time I heard anything about him. The guards never told me how he managed to get in. This spring, something strange happened to me. My wife and I went to the river to stargaze. We were standing by the dam when we noticed two very bright lights in the sky. They were close to each other but didn't look like stars or part of any constellation. Then a third light appeared, slowly moving to form a triangle. I thought they might be planets or a satellite, but suddenly, we heard a splash in the water. We looked down, and when we glanced back at the sky a few seconds later, the lights were gone. It was eerily quiet and unsettling. We quickly got into the car and drove home, still not sure what we had just witnessed. One night, I was working a night shift at the hospital. It was around 4 a.m. The hallways were empty and dimly lit. As I walked down the corridor, I suddenly saw a man standing there. Blood was dripping from his hand, and he was shouting someone's name. My heart dropped. What the hell was this? Turned out, he was a patient who had just had a venous line removed after surgery. I was sure he was being monitored and restrained, but somehow, he got loose. He was shouting his wife's name, begging her to pick up their kids from school. His hand was bleeding badly, and he looked completely disoriented. It was one of the creepiest shifts I've ever worked. I once worked a night shift at a warehouse that was still under construction. Some areas were closed off for building work, and there were motion-activated lights throughout the place. Near where I was stationed, there was an almost finished wing. The workers only came during the day, and it was completely locked up at night. The problem? Those lights kept turning on. Not all at once, like when someone walks through, but randomly. One would flick on, then maybe a few together. Sometimes they'd go off in sync. Other times they'd light up one after another in different spots. It was 2 a.m., and I was alone in this massive, empty warehouse. The lights were going wild. Sure, I told myself it was probably rats, but knowing you're not entirely alone in a place like that, especially when you're sleep-deprived, was downright unnerving. For 2 years, I worked as a night stalker at ODP. It was just me and one other guy in a locked store with an alarm system. The only way out was the emergency exit. It should have been a quiet job, but it was anything but. The first weird experience happened while we were in the back office making promotional signs. It was silent until we suddenly heard footsteps in the hallway. They got closer and stopped right outside the door. We both froze, staring at each other. I checked, and no one was there. It happened at least a dozen times after that. The creepiest incident was around 2 a.m. one night. The phone rang. My coworker answered but hung up after a few seconds. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, he yelled, "You've got the wrong number. Stop calling." I asked who it was. He said, "Some girl." The phone rang again, and this time, he put it on speaker. "Why are you ignoring me? Why won't you just talk to me?" A woman's voice said. I explained it was the wrong number and asked her to stop. She went quiet, then the phone rang again. I joked, "She's probably just crazy." My coworker answered, and we heard her crying and screaming, "I'm not crazy." Then she hung up. She never called again. After that, the weirdness didn't stop. Shadows out of the corner of our eyes, voices, strange noises. When I went on my honeymoon, a new guy took over my shift. He lasted 3 nights. I ran into him a few weeks later and asked why he quit. He just said, "There's something there, man." I couldn't stay. Everyone who's worked there at night has seen or heard something they couldn't explain. I work as a night shift supervisor at a care home. Usually, the nights are quiet. It's just me and 3 residents who tend to sleep soundly. But one night still haunts me. Around 2 a.m., I heard a loud bang, like a door slamming shut. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I quickly checked all the rooms. Everyone was asleep. It might not sound too creepy, but here's the thing. All the residents are in wheelchairs. After that, I spent the rest of the night on edge, and it wasn't the only strange thing. A few times, cans fell off the shelves for no reason. A clock fell off the wall, and the call light in the bathroom just went out. I try not to think about it too much, but every now and then, I catch myself wondering, what the hell is going on here? During lunch, I was sitting on the ground, leaning against the wall. I dozed off for a few minutes, but woke up to a strange sound. There was a bush next to me, which was odd because it wasn't there before. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, but when my eyes fully opened, I realized it wasn't a bush. It was a skunk with its tail raised. The sound that woke me up? It was growling. I took a huge breath and held it, bracing myself for a gas attack from the skunk. I guess my inhale scared it because it quickly ran off. It took a while for my heartbeat to return to normal after that. If you have been in similar situations, please like this post. Write in the comments what situations have you been in.